Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast. I am your host, John Macri, fantasy analyst here at PFF, and I am once again joined by the great Kate Magdziuk. Helping me break down another week of upcoming football action. Kate, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. We've got some Thursday night football. We've got some interesting matchups. We've got London, eh?
Yes.
Like we've got some international games. Like, this is gonna be a fun weekend. I will say though, John, not my favorite week for like general matchups. Not a ton of matchups I'm overly crazy about this week, which means our audience will have tougher decisions than ever. So
yeah,
we're here to help.
Yeah, there are some tougher ones. I even found that doing, like the O-line D-line article this week, the wide receiver man zone coverage report. There was a few neutral matchups that I found a little bit more than usual. So it's a tougher week to figure out, but that's what we're here for. We're going to try to go through it all, see if we can come up with some answers here. Because once again, we're going to go game by game. We got another full week slate of games here because there's no bye weeks yet. Usually we get the bye weeks in week 4, but we're not there yet. They should start next week, or they do start next week. But again, we'll go through it all. I'm going to pull the timestamps again for people that are listening or watching on YouTube that want to jump from game to game. We'll put those in the episode descriptions as well. Be sure to check those out. And looking forward to it. But before we get into the big slate here, we do have to give a quick shout out to our presenting sponsor, Fabric by Gerber Life. Fall is all about the back to school and back to routine checklist, and the most important task on that list should be securing your family's financial future, starting with life insurance. Fabric by Gerber Life makes it quick, easy, and affordable to protect your family so you can get back to enjoying life. Fabric was designed by parents for parents to help you get a high quality, surprisingly affordable term life insurance policy in less than 10 minutes. Fabric has flexible policies that fit your family and your budget with quality policies like $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day. Get your personalized quote in just minutes and then apply when it's convenient for you. It's all online and on your schedule. You can go from start to covered in less than 10 minutes with no health exam required. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to protect their family. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/fantasy. That's meetfabric.com/fantasy, MEET fabric.com/fantasy. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. All right, let's start things off where we always do. Thursday night football, battle of the NFC North. We could get a new leader in the NFC North here, so that's somewhat interesting here. The Detroit Lions and the Green Bay Packers. A few interesting notes here. We got a couple players coming back from injury as well. So, Kate, where do you want to start with Lions Packers?
Let's start with the run game. How about that? Let's start with the Packers run game, to be more specific, because we've had Aaron Jones out with a hamstring injury. It sounds like he is going to be back in action. And now, we have AJ Dillon, who was unplayable for fantasy, even in a starting role. My biggest question right now is, should you even be rostering AJ Dillon with the return of Aaron Jones?
I'd wait maybe until after this week. Hopefully he doesn't see like a setback or anything with the hamstring. We know how hamstrings can be as far as like re-injury rate and stuff like that. So they'll probably ease Aaron Jones back in this week. At least that's what it sounds like for the workload that at least here on a short week as well. So one more week of AJ Dillon and then out the door. Once we see that Aaron Jones is fine, that I'm fine moving on from him after this week.
Then he gets the caboot. And then on the other side of the ball, return of David Montgomery. Very exciting, maybe for some, not all. Hashtag Jahmyr Gibbs managers might not be overly excited about that. But to date, we still haven't really had the true Jahmyr Gibbs breakout game. So what are your expectations for Jahmyr Gibbs heading into this matchup?
Yeah, I think I would have been more excited for him if David Montgomery wasn't going to play, right? Because we saw him get more usage last week, more than we thought, right? Because we did assume Craig Reynolds was going to play that David Montgomery role. And to the Lions' credit, they did deploy Jahmyr Gibbs more than expected. The Packers are a decent matchup for like rushing yards. At least they're allowing 136.7 rushing yards per game, which ranks tied for 27th. So there was potential here. I do worry with David Montgomery coming back that, you know, he's going to obviously eat into those touches. He'll probably get the goal line work again as well. So it's been a little bit of a bummer so far to start the year for Jahmyr Gibbs and his fantasy managers. So I'd say, you know, back to kind of the usual. It feels like, unless they surprise us again. I don't know. How are you feeling about it?
I'm not feeling like great. I'm not, you know what, this is kind of one of the less exciting matchups for me on the schedule this week. You know, NFC North showdown. I could easily imagine this, you know, this in Lambeau, like this could be a low scoring game. This could be kind of one of these fairly uneventful games for fantasy. Like I don't think that there's going to be a ton of scoring on either side of the ball. You know, Packers defense, I think has been fine to this point in the season. They haven't been, you know, shut down by any stretch of the imagination, but you know, I think they're good enough. You also have Jared Goff, who's on the road, and you know, those home road splits for Jared Goff have been absolutely dreadful. So like, you know, not just on the road, he's in, you know, one of the most hostile environments, you know, in the entire NFL. We might just be in for, you know, like a punt, end of quarter kind of matchup and until they get in a rhythm here later on.
Yeah, this is typical for Thursday night games, right? We get
Yes.
these just weird, terrible games to end up watching. So I like fairly excited about it, but then as you remind me, yeah, that does that bring my expectations down a little bit for what to expect tonight. But yeah, that the other thing for this game too is like it sounds like Christian Watson will also be back, but also potentially limited as well. I think they said that they were going to be cautious with his workload. So we'll see what that looks like. But yeah, I guess I'd be hesitant about firing up Christian Watson in this one, just because again that talk of a limited workload. We want to kind of see how he looks coming off also a hamstring injury, and this Lions defense has been decent as well.
Yeah, I think the only player that I'm kind of excited about on the Packers side of the ball is tight end Luke Musgrave. The Lions are allowing the second most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, 87.7 receiving yards per game to the tight end position from the Detroit Lions. Leads the league in like a mile, and that includes a matchup in week 1 against the Chiefs where they didn't even have to face Travis Kelce. You know, the big issue in terms of there being a standout player against this defense, which is why maybe you know, this production versus the tight end has gone a little bit under the radar, is that we've seen several offenses that are deploying multiple tight ends. So week 1 in the Chiefs offense, you had Noah Gray, Blake Bell. They kind of split those touches there. In Seattle, you had Noah Fant, Colby Parkinson, Will Dissly. Then you had Kyle Pitts and Johnny Smith, whose workload is way too close to one another for comfort for any fantasy manager. So like this is like, I think, kind of the first matchup where we're going to get kind of like a true tight end one facing a pretty, you know, leaky Detroit Lions defense when it comes to the tight end position.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And this is also kind of a result of the Lions deploying Alex Anzalone in a full-time role and not using their first round pick, Jack Campbell, a little bit more. But this is the I guess the punishment that they get for that is that these tight ends can go off on any given week against them. So I like it. I'm a Luke Musgrave fan as well. So excited for a potential Luke Musgrave showcase here on Thursday.
Yeah. What do we say? Big hand or big frame,
big
big hands,
big frame. Yeah. Big upside or something.
Yes. Something like that.
The
Something like
t-shirts
that.
never got made. So this is the problem. We can't look down at our shirts to figure it out.
Seriously, I'm still waiting for mine in the mail. Whoever's listening to this podcast, you know, send them over to us, and we'll wear them. But it remains true, especially for this matchup.
Yeah. Definitely. All right, let's go on to the Falcons and the Jaguars. This is the London game, so it'll be played early Sunday morning. Just another reminder for people, because it happens every year. People forget to set their lineups Sunday morning, but set an alarm or something. Remember that Atlanta and Jacksonville play. So if you have players in this game and you want to play them, you have to get them in those lineups early. And yeah, let's start with the Falcons here. Any faith in Drake London or Kyle Pitts this week?
I think you're asking for a lot there, John. I think I think you're asking for a lot. No, the matchup against the Jaguars, I don't think is necessarily a bad one. I think this is a fine, like both of these defenses I'd consider beatable but not easy defenses. I think they're kind of evenly matched in that regard, but it's just really, really hard to trust this matchup, this receiving core with Desmond Ritter at at the helm here under center. There's just not a lot of consistency, and like I mentioned, dating back to last week, you had this pretty much even split between tight end Kyle Pitts and Jonnu Smith. Combined for 17 targets, which you love to see that. But I would really love if Kyle Pitts got more targets than Jonnu Smith. That would be really nice. So I'm just not trusting the split there. I'm not trusting the passing work. This Jaguars defense, they're going to have some, I think dirt to kick off their shoulders or some phrase like that. They're coming off like a bad loss. Jaguars, this is, London games are Jaguars territory, baby. This is a situation that I probably want to stay away from in terms of really any of these receiving options. I just don't know how you trust that inconsistency.
Yeah, I have a really hard time with it for sure. And I wrote about Drake London in the wide receiver man zone matchup report this week. The Jaguars, they're a top 10 team in zone coverage rate this season, and they've been solid there. They rank above average in coverage grade. They're above average in yards allowed per coverage target while in zone. So meanwhile, you look at Drake London in London, as fun as that potential headline could be if he goes off, he's managing just 0.15 fantasy points per route run against zone coverage this season, which ranks 95th among 109 qualifying wide receivers. So not ideal there. I worry about Drake London this week. I worry about Kyle Pitts. Like you said, the usage is just it's an abomination. There were rumors that he might want to get traded to the Cowboys, or that the Cowboys are interested in trading for him. Would you be interested in him there? Would you sacrifice Jake Ferguson for Kyle Pitts in Dallas?
I would, although I love me some Jake Ferguson. I really do. And I think his upside's plenty high in this offense here. If Jake Ferguson were a part of that trade and he was headed to the Atlanta Falcons, I might actually lose my mind in anger. But yeah, I think you'd pretty much prefer Kyle Pitts in any offense except this one, where there's a little bit more passing volume, a little bit more consistency in terms of the quality of target you're going to get. Yeah. How many targets have we seen just kind of buzz by or buzz behind Kyle Pitts this season? It just hasn't been an ideal match here with Desmond Ritter through the first couple weeks of the season. But obviously, there's still plenty of time left in the season, and who knows if things start to go south, if Desmond Ritter is going to be the starting quarterback for this team long term.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Hopefully things turn around and something happens there to change and give us Kyle Pitts on a more consistent fantasy basis. And then Jacksonville, like you said, in for a potential bounce back week here, I think, as a whole, right? I mean, Calvin Ridley, he finished as wide receiver 6 in week 1. He's followed that up now with a wide receiver 80 and wide receiver 65 performance in PPR. So I think this should be a positive matchup for Ridley. Atlanta's just like an average coverage team. Nothing really scares you about this defense. How do you feel about a bounce back? Revenge game. That's right. I didn't even think. Why did I not?
It's the Calvin Ridley. Come on. Yeah, we need the Calvin Ridley revenge game. It's going to be so great. Now, here's the thing. So Calvin Ridley seeing plenty of opportunity. It hasn't translated to fantasy production, which has been very unfortunate after the upside we saw in week 1. averaging over 8 targets per game. You love to see the usage, but
Mhm.
here's been the kicker. 5th highest drop rate among wide receivers with 10 or more targets this year, 23.5% drop rate. That is more than double his career average, which is under 10%, 9.1% to be exact. I like it's uncharacteristic, right? I think this whole Jaguars offense, it's been a kind of season of almosts, and it's been kind of a story of, them not meeting their potential because they're kicking themselves in the butt. And I think if they can clean up some of these mistakes, if Calvin Ridley can clean up some of these drops, they're almost there. And I think you just need a couple of things to click just right, and you're going to see that bounce back. And I mean, why not? Why not chase Calvin Ridley in the ultimate revenge game?
I like it. This is a good one. And like you said, the thing with drops too, they're not a stable metric, whether it's week to week or year to year, right? You need the targets to get the drops as well. So as long as those targets are there, that the usage is there for Calvin Ridley, you just keep trusting him and trust that the production is going to follow as well. So yeah, I'm with you. I think this should be a great game for Calvin Ridley. And then the other piece of this Jaguars offense, you wrote a great headline in the running back touches report, which is Tank Bigsby remains a pain in ETN's upside. That's just I love that headline. So tell us about the Jaguars backfield here.
My very carefully crafted headline. Yes. So here's the thing. ETN has been totally dominant in terms of like the snaps so far through this backfield. Like we kind of hinted early on in our initial conversations here when I joined the show that we might actually see some eaten carries from Tank Bigsby, and that hasn't been the case most of the time. So he's played just 37 snaps throughout the first 3 weeks. Like, okay, who cares? Like, yes, ETN needs to leave the field at some point, but the biggest issue is that Tank Bigsby has seen every single one of those rush attempts inside the 5 this year. Don't love it. Do not love it, because guess what? That's translating to touchdown production for Tank Bigsby, and it's limiting that upside. So like ETN, he's the RB10 right now in fantasy. You're going to take that all day, but add in a couple touchdowns there, which went to Tank Bigsby, and you might be looking at like a top 4, top 5 running back. And, maybe that would be the case prior to the great Miami Dolphins running back parade of 2003 week 3. But yeah, like Travis Etienne, you're kind of missing that top end production because he's not being used around the goal line. And that makes me really sad.
Yeah, that's the problem, right? And then it's something we definitely talked about all off season. It just limits his ceiling there. And look, the thing too with Tank Bigsby, it's not as heavily involved, like you said, right now, but we do tend to see rookies get more involved as the year goes on. So if he starts to be productive and start to show a little bit more in this offense, they may lean on him a little bit more, especially if Travis Etienne starts to kind of get banged up a little bit, isn't, feeling 100% kind of thing. They may look to limit that workload as well. So taking away those goal line carries, it is a big I think hit to ETN's overall value for the rest of the season if it continues in that role. Although he has, like you said, been very productive so far without it, so that has been nice. But anything else from this game, Jaguars, Falcons in London?
Yeah, I think we can move on, Governor.
Just a spot on accent there, perfect.
If we get a Drake London touchdown in London, they have to play what's that song? London Calling.
London's Calling. Yeah.
I don't remember who it's from. But they need to play that. So just
nice.
Mental note to the broadcast team, do that.
Yeah, I'm not a big music guy. I know this. Is that the Ramones or somebody else, or I don't know. Somebody's
something like
yell.
that.
Somebody's yelling.
The Ramones, The Cure. I don't know, one of these angry bands from like the 80s or not. I don't even know what era we're in. I have no idea. But I'm in my Drake London music advice era. That's what era I'm in.
Perfect. Yeah, that works. All right, let's go on to the Cincinnati Bengals and the Tennessee Titans. Couple struggling offenses here. Both teams are 1-2 now, although the Bengals are at least coming off of a win. I believe we called the big Jamar Chase game last week, and even without a touchdown, he did deliver there. How do you feel about a T. Higgins big game this week? Because I'm feeling that.
I feel like we just keep bouncing back and forth, right? Like you saw, it's
Yeah.
been one or the other, and to this point, we've just gone back and forth. So sure, T. Higgins, another game, just like we mentioned with Calvin Ridley, though. So like the hands of steel that we saw
Yeah.
from T. Higgins in week 3. I do think we're going to start to see those hands bounce back a little bit. Not the best week in terms of production here from T. Higgins. 3 drops last week. You don't love to see that, but you know what the best part is? You love to see or 3 drops on the season. You love to see the targets, right? Like 26 targets on the season. You're going to take that all day. That's tied for the 13th most among all wide receivers. Again, hasn't translated to catches, which has been unfortunate. 38.5% catch rate. Not good, my friend. But like, again, you have to expect some of this positive regression to bounce back, unless there's something else going on with T. Higgins that we don't know about. But obviously we saw it in week 2 against the Baltimore Ravens, not necessarily like the easiest secondary, had 8 catches, 89 yards, 2 touchdowns. Like it feels like maybe this is the next bounce back week.
Yeah, I think so. And look, for me, just looking at it a little bit in the man zone production report here, like the Titans have been more of a man-heavy defense. They've also allowed the 4th most yards per coverage snap at 9.12. Higgins early this season, has been Burrow's top target against man coverage. He's earned a 35% target rate, which is first on the team, and nearly double that of his target rate against zone. 0.73 fantasy points per route run against man, which is 12th among wide receivers. Meanwhile, Jamar Chase ranks 73rd in that regard. So big difference there. I don't think I have any concerns about plugging T. Higgins into lineups this week against the Titans. And I feel good about Jamar Chase too, for the record, but I do like this matchup for T. Higgins, just from what we've seen so far this season. And I think Burrow will go back to him after the rough Monday night that he had against the Rams.
Yeah, you got to shake it off.
Yeah, shake
it off.
There we go. That's the first one. We gotta
don't forget, we need a timestamp on that one. First Taylor Swift reference of the day.
Yeah, there it is. Probably won't be the last. As far as the Titans go, I just continue to have no interest in this Titans passing game. The Bengals, one of the better man coverage units in the league. There's just not a lot to love from Tennessee right now. DeAndre Hopkins, I think you still play him like in deeper leagues, like as like a wide receiver 3 type. I don't love the matchup for him though. So you're really banking on target rate. You're banking on Tannehill having a better game. How do you feel about this Titans offense right now?
Hands off. No, no. I don't see, usually with this kind of Titans offense, I feel, fine chasing some upside and plus matchups. I don't think this is the one to do it. And to be honest, I don't think this offense is good enough to give you kind of like the performance you'd really want, even in, a good to average matchup. Like this is just not a great offense for fantasy. So staying away from those options. Curious though, how are you feeling about Derrick Henry coming out off a terrible game? Are you trusting Derrick Henry in this matchup? Are you at all concerned about the Tajay Spears snaps? That's sort of been like the Mojo headline of the week, or the month, is that Tajay Spears is out snapping Derrick Henry. Not been the most efficient this year, 3.2 yards per rush attempt, only 1 touchdown on the year. Are you like temperature check?
I don't feel great about him. I don't like what I've seen from this Titans offense as a whole. And I think it does affect Derrick Henry as well, right? Like if this offense is struggling to produce, they're also going to be playing from behind a lot too, right? So it doesn't give them necessarily that opportunity to ride Derrick Henry and let him kind of chew up the clock by just running him into the ground constantly and allow him to pile up those yards. And then with him not playing on passing downs too, and ceding that role to Tajay Spears, that also takes away from his opportunity to potentially catch some passes and make up for some of that lost rushing production. So Just keep getting lower on Derrick Henry each week as the season goes on here. There's still decent volume there if they can have a good matchup, but I don't think it's this week, even though, the Bengals run defense isn't like amazing by any means, but I do think that they'll potentially get behind here and that will cause more of a negative game script for Henry.
Yeah, and the thing about this team, which kind of has been the case in years past, but I think they've had a younger, fresher Derrick Henry to maybe counteract
Mhm.
some of that more, is that they just don't have enough threats. Significant threats with the play of Ryan Tannehill, an older DeAndre Hopkins. Like, I think these weapons are still fine, but are they enough to take like significant pressure off of Henry in terms of like the defensive attention that he commands? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't really think so, and I don't think that works in favor, at least based on what we've seen from the passing and receiving game so far from this offense.
Yeah, I just don't trust it for this year. I'm sure he'll have like a couple of his like typical Derrick Henry games, but I don't know when they're going to come. We'll look at the schedules and matchups and stuff like that as the weeks go on, but I'm not banking on it this week. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the New Orleans Saints. It's Mike Evans versus Marshawn Lattimore week. Everybody is very excited. We know Lattimore has mostly dominated Evans so far in their career, but I still feel decent about Mike Evans this week. I mean, I think his worst finish this year has been wide receiver 21 in PPR. So considering the matchup here, Kate, over under PPR wide receiver 21 for Mike Evans this week. How you feel?
Think over. Like he seems to have that kind of waking up feeling dangerous type vibe with Baker Mayfield, which
Yeah.
I was skeptical of. And it like obviously didn't see a ton of production out of Baker Mayfield last week against the Eagles. Tough matchup. But I think this is one of those situations where you continue to go to your best option. Mike Evans ranked 10th in PFF receiving grade so far this season. Just has kind of dominated. 3 receiving touchdowns. He's one of just 3 or 4 wide receivers with 3 or more touchdowns on the year. Has been able to make plays after the catch. Like, he's doing everything you want. And I think you got to go back to the well. Same thing with Chris Godwin. I'm okay with Chris Godwin as
Mhm.
well. Um, I think this is a fine matchup. Um, how about Rashad White though? Like the Saints, how are we feeling about this defensive matchup?
Yeah, the Rashad White is one that I'm most likely fading the most from this Buccaneers offense. I think the Saints run defense has been pretty solid so far. They're good defense altogether, but their defensive line has been really solid. The Tampa Bay offensive line, as far as run blocking goes, hasn't been amazing. So I think the advantage goes to the Saints in this one. And yeah, I think I'm with you. I like the matchup too, like enough. Well, not like, I shouldn't say like's a strong word, but for Evans
Tolerate.
and Godwin, yeah, I
It's
tolerate the matchup
tolerable.
for Evans and Godwin as well. Yeah, I'm not fading them. I'm not overly excited about either of them, but if you've been starting them previously, I think there's still a good chance I'm starting them this week. And yeah, it's just, yeah, Rashad White would be the one that I think is going to be the lowest on the totem pole for me in this Bucks offense. I'm not as excited about him against the Saints here.
That whole sentence that you just said is exactly how I want to box week 4. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
excited about him, but if you've been playing him, you're probably gonna like, that is week 4 in a nutshell for almost
Yeah.
everybody in fantasy football this week, it feels like for me.
Yeah, it's definitely a feeling that I've had here this week as well. On the Saints side, the return of Alvin Kamara. So what does his role look like? I think in the first week back is going to be the biggest question. We know Jamal Williams is on IR. Kendre Miller was relatively ineffective as the top back last week, and Kamara wasn't as great of a rusher last year either, but he did do damage as a receiving option. So I think top 24 PPR running back this week still makes sense in his first week back, but we'll see. How do you feel about Alvin Kamara this week in his return?
I'm feeling lukewarm, like
Okay.
lukewarm. I'm fading him. I know, like, the thing about Alvin Kamara is if you're a fantasy manager that has been patiently holding on to Alvin Kamara this entire time, you're probably in a position where you might need to start him just based on, the fact that you used a relatively early draft pick, 5th, 6th round, maybe on Alvin Kamara. You missed out on another starting asset. So like you're probably playing him, but growing concern is just that downtrending efficiency in general. Seeing a decrease in yards after contact per attempt, missed forced tackle rate each of the last 3 seasons. The Buccaneers have kept him like in check relatively. Over the last 2 seasons, 2 out of his 3 matchups have had fewer than 6 points in PPR. Like there hasn't been a ton of upside there, and I don't think this is as scary a matchup. Like the Bucs used to be this matchup that you couldn't run against whatsoever. I don't think that's necessarily the case this year, but I think they're fine against the run, and then pair that with the concerns about efficiency for Kamara, and that's where I start to get a little bit iffy.
Right. Yeah, it's not an amazing matchup like you said. I think if I had to choose between like Alvin Kamara or Rachaad White, I'd probably still lean Kamara. I do like it a little bit more. Tampa Bay run defense they rank 30th in run defense grade so far this year, but like I said, it's going to be his first week back, and those efficiency concerns last year were real as far as rushing goes. There wasn't the opportunity for him to kind of put up an even better production floor. So that did hurt him, but still does it as a wide receiver or as a receiver. So we'll see if that helps him again this week or not. But anything else in this game? I mean, you're starting Chris Olave, Michael Thomas in deeper leagues, probably. Anything else stand out to you?
No.
All right, let's go on then to the Los Angeles Rams at the Indianapolis Colts. Where do you want to start with this game?
Let's start with Anthony Richardson, maybe. It sounds like he's progressing through the protocol, still not. I don't know if we've heard any news if he's like ready to play. Like, have you heard anything?
So he returned to
like
practice. So it's at least a step in the right direction, not like a full participant or anything like that. He hasn't exactly been cleared yet. Hopefully we get some clarity here before Friday or by Friday. But Minshew, he was fine. I think, as far as fantasy goes, like, and keeping these Colts wide receivers fairly usable, at least Pittman, Josh Downs as well. So yeah, that would be one to monitor, because Anthony Richardson has been, an excellent fantasy asset, but just has already shown a tendency to get banged up, which has been a little bit unfortunate here, because he's going to be running a lot. He's going to get hit a lot. So hopefully he can stay healthy. But yeah, just kind of monitoring the practice reports so far.
Yeah, monitor that. He needs to get cleared by Saturday in order to play. But I like to see that he's made some progress here, heading into Thursday. So that is a good thing. I do think, like, if he's active, you play him at this point. Let's not forget 17 points last week, and he played just over a quarter. Like, insane. Like that kind of production, thanks to his, efficiency on the ground and the number of touchdowns he's scoring on the ground. You're gonna start that, and I don't think the concerns from him as from a passing perspective have been as significant as I would have thought after seeing him play in the preseason. So you're starting him. I do think you're starting Pittman on a week-to-week basis. He's had 11 targets in each of the 3 games this season, at least 8 receptions in each, at least 50 receiving yards in each. And his biggest week of all came in week 1 when you had Anthony Richardson there for a full matchup. So you love to see that. So that's kind of where I'm at with this Colts with the Colts backfield. You're playing Zach Moss. Maybe this is the last week you get him. I don't know. But when the Jonathan Taylors are away, the Zach Mosses will play. And Zach Mosses will play this weekend in all of my fantasy lineups.
I mean, he's been amazing. The workhorse usage has just been like the perfect scenario for him. He's finished as an RB10, RB5 in both of his starts. Jonathan Taylor, like you said, he could be healthy soon, but he did mention again that he's not interested in playing for the Colts. So See you later, bud. We got Zach Moss now. We don't need you. Yeah, it's been so nice to see that usage for Zach Moss. We would love that for all of our fantasy running backs, but we'll take it for a couple of them like Zach Moss. Another one that we also see it with is Kyron Williams of the Los Angeles Rams here. He's been another kind of workhorse usage. I feel pretty good about firing him up this week as well. Anything else on the Rams side that you want to talk about?
No.
No.
No,
Okay. Fair enough.
you've
Yeah.
got
I was just gonna say, yeah, Puka Nacua was maybe the one. I think last week we talked about like tempering expectations for him against the Bengals, right? And he did have a lower production week than what we've been used to him. Obviously, he finished as wide receiver 36, but this week I think he goes back to that kind of top tier production against a zone heavy defense of the Colts. He's Puka Nacua has been one of the best wide receivers against zone this year, 84.9 receiving grade, which is 7th. He's 10th in fantasy points per route run against zone. Target rate against zone is 35.4%, which was just 21% against man. And I say just, even though that's a nice number. And then the Colts, 26th ranked coverage grade in the league right now. So pretty decent matchup for Puka Nacua again to kind of go wild. Hopefully we keep getting that usage for him because that's been beautiful.
Any curiosity here, like, is Tutu Atwell a weekly flex? Maybe that's the thing we're talking about, because I think you're starting Puka week in, week out, but Tutu Atwell to this point has yet to finish outside the top 30. It has 2 top 20 finishes so far this year, wide receiver 14 so far, and that's with the number of targets that you're seeing from Puka Nacua. So
yeah,
maybe it makes no sense to me. It like the production makes no sense. A teeny Tutu Atwell is kind of crushing it for fantasy, and he might just be like a set it and forget it flex play until proven otherwise, which makes me question everything I thought I knew about tiny wide receivers.
He's been so good. Yeah, the way that this offense has run, the way like targeting those two guys so heavily, Stafford obviously feeling very comfortable in going to them. And man, I'm definitely playing Tutu Atwell in the flex. He saved my week last week. With that last minute touchdown, he got me a nice win in one of my matchups there. And I think he has a chance to just kind of keep being productive. He's got the target rate. He's got the volume. Everything is there for him. So I think at least until Cooper Kupp comes back and we see maybe that usage shift a little bit, I'm plugging him into lineups.
Yeah, I mean, again, like pretty much always, this season so far, especially with the number of crazy things we've seen, not something that I would have predicted preseason. And I feel like I'm saying that a lot, and it keeps ringing true. But yeah, Tutu Atwell, wide receiver 2, baby. Like let's go.
Yeah, I'm all for it. And yeah, it's just it's always the NFL always gives us surprises. Tutu Atwell has been a pleasant one this year. So moving on to the Minnesota Vikings at the Carolina Panthers. Oh man, what a matchup this is. Alexander Mattison, I want to start there. I get that he's been a bit frustrating for fantasy managers, but still getting a really great workload. Cam Akers was a healthy scratch last week. I guess, still not up to speed with the offense. We'll see if he plays this week, but I don't know that Cam Akers will be heavily involved this week if he is active. We liked Madison last week. He finished as RB10. I think it's another plus matchup here against the Panthers. The Vikings O-line is a top 5 run blocking unit. Panthers D-line has allowed 1.6 yards before contact, which ranks 25th. So should be another positive matchup for Alexander Mattison this week. How are you feeling about him after his better game last week?
I'm feeling kind of good. I think there's been a lot of discussion about Cam Akers and, oh, he's going to, steal the job. He's going to steal the carries. But I think we're still forgetting that this is a guy who was competing with Ronnie Rivers for touches. And Sean McVay looked at Ronnie Rivers and was like, upgrade. You're a huge upgrade over my backup running back right now. I don't that's not good. Cam Akers, you want to talk about, the inefficiencies of Alexander Mattison. Akers is averaging 1.3 yards per attempt. There's a reason he lost his job. They're, 22 carries, 29 rushing yards, lucky to have a score, but Like there is a reason that this team was willing to move on from Cam Akers. And I understand the fit there with Kevin O'Connell. So I think that kind of was a natural marriage, right? Like, Kevin O'Connell, maybe not necessarily tired of Cam Akers and the shenanigans just yet, and the inconsistencies in production. So, yeah, I think, if you're Kevin O'Connell, this seems like a great deal, right? You basically sneeze and give up your used tissue in order to trade for him. And then, like again, no risk whatsoever, but you gain in return a running back that's familiar with your system, and that and like you have familiarity with. Like I think that's what that move was. Matchup I love, and I think this is going to be a week that fantasy managers are going to kind of pull off the gas a little bit for Alexander Madison, but I think this is a pretty good spot to keep starting him.
Yep. Yeah, I'm with you 100%. I mean, as far as the other Vikings options go, we pretty much know where we're starting for them for the most part. So on the Carolina side, Bryce Young is potentially back this week. It looked like he returned to practice after the ankle injury sidelined him last week. So that'll be good to see. Here's another revenge game. Adam Thielen gets a revenge game against the Minnesota Vikings. So I do feel pretty good about Adam Thielen this week. He's been pretty good to start here. I mean, Minnesota's weakness on defense has been their man coverage. They've been above average there in deploying that man coverage this season. They rank 31st in yards per coverage snap, which ranks 31st. And Thielen has been the 7th best receiving wide receiver against man. He's got the 7th best receiving grade, 84.6, 9th in fantasy points per run against man. I think we could get a nice Adam Thielen revenge game this week.
I love the theme of revenge games. I think it's so fun. And, I think that this is a particularly fun one because like Adam Thielen, it's such an underdog, right? Like it came out as an undrafted free agent, beat all the odds, and then this team kind of looked at him like a used toy. And then, he's come out and been a pretty reliable option for, this rookie and, has, I think, been a really valuable veteran addition to a pretty inexperienced receiving room. And I love rooting for the David and Goliath situation. And this feels like one of those underdog matchups, like Adam Thielen, I think especially in full PPR formats, it has some upside there, which was again not something that I thought we were going to say a lot of this year. But he seems to be one of these targets that they are featuring quite a bit in this offense. And when you're in dire straits, right, it's really difficult to turn down some of that potential volume.
Yeah, he's been very reliable this year. He looks great out there, which is good to see. Chalk went up for the older wide receivers in the league there. The other piece of the Panthers offense I think is worth touching on, Miles Sanders. I think he's performed well this year as far as fantasy goes, just on volumes of targets and receptions that he's got. Already 18 targets on the year. So he had 28 targets all of last year in 20 games, so including the playoffs. I think, if he can start delivering maybe some rushing yards as well for us, that would be nice. It could be a decent matchup here against the Vikings. They rank 27th in run defense grade. So Miles Sanders, how you feel about him? He's been a decent fantasy option through the first 3 weeks.
He's been decent. He's a guy that I haven't been necessarily overly excited about in terms of upside. But again, like for where you drafted him, I think he's a fine play. Not a matchup I'm like targeting in DFS necessarily, but a fine play in terms of volume. And this is coming from the girl who's really tried to rally and get some Chuba Hubbard involved in this offense. I want to see Chuba Hubbard get some more touches, but to this point, it's Miles Sanders, baby.
Yeah, and I mean Chuba Hubbard is kind of creeping up there a little bit. He's got in a decent amount of workload, but it's just been the volume of targets that Sanders has got that's just kind of kept him on the fantasy radar and in starting lineups for the most part. So we'll see if that continues this week against the Vikings, but still a decent play here is Miles Sanders. At least we got a good interesting game coming up here. Miami Dolphins at the Buffalo Bills. We talked about Devin Achane quite a bit in the recap episode and the waiver wire episode. So I don't know how much more we need to touch on him here, but what are your feelings on this game? At least got to be excited about Miami and Buffalo.
You've got to be excited. Again, like this is going to be one of the fun games on the week, but I would also not be surprised if this ended up being a little bit of a more of a defensive game than maybe we would have scripted out. Obviously, like two really high flying offenses with a lot of upside, but Miami Dolphins have been pretty solid in terms of their defense. So have the Buffalo Bills. So it's, I think, going to be kind of a struggle to see which one of these two teams wins out. On the Dolphin side of the ball, like I think the Buffalo Bills defense, interestingly enough, ranked 11th in PFF defense grade overall. I think they look like one of the better defenses in the entire league. Just looks absolutely suffocating. And I think that could be the case against the run. I do not expect this to be the same kind of free-for-all matchup that they saw against the Denver Broncos. So maybe I'm like, what's the word? Cold water. Throwing cold water on I don't know, whatever. I'm
towel or wet blanket.
Wet blanket. I'm a wet blanket. And so maybe I'm the wet blanket for the Miami Dolphins. Obviously Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, like it's going to be very hard to stop this defense, but I think, or stop that offense. But generally speaking, you're going to get a much bigger challenge against the Buffalo Bills than you're going to get from the Denver Broncos tenfold, maybe 20-fold.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree there. I think this game will be a lot closer than 70-20 or whatever. Yeah, 70-20 against the Broncos last week. Unreal. So yeah, I think the game script at least should probably be more favorable to Raheem Mostert in this game, just as it stays close. So a lot of people picked up Devin Achane off waivers last week, so I don't know that he's going to get the same positive game script to get as heavily involved this week, but there could be games like that down the road. But yeah, I'm with you. You're starting everybody in this game. Waddle is back. Obviously, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, even Gabe Davis, I think worth a shot here in this one. But let's move on, because we're excited about the Miami Buffalo game, but how is this for a contrast in matchups, going from the high-powered offense of the Dolphins and the Bills to probably our weekly battle of mid contender? Last week, I think it was the Raiders D-line versus the Steelers O-line. So this week, it is just the Broncos versus the Bears, period. That is where we're at here in the schedule. Denver Broncos, Chicago Bears, two teams that got blown out last week. How are you feeling about this matchup?
This matchup is that Spider-Man meme where the two Spider-Mans are pointing at each other, and like this is going to be gross. Like neither of these offense or defenses can be trusted, but then again, neither can the offenses be trusted. I think on probably both sides of the ball here, the defenses are worse. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some offensive production out of both of these teams. I'm not excited about trusting either of these two sides, but I think the production, just in terms of matchup, can be there for both of them. Now, I think you're still giving Justin Fields one more shot, right? Like if he can't do it in this matchup against the Broncos, he might be droppable. Russell Wilson on the other side of the ball, like against the Chicago Bears, who, just lost their defensive coordinator. This team's a mess. Like he should find some room. There's plenty of talent on both of these offenses. So I think that could be an opportunity for maybe some more points to be scored than we might think. So maybe some more yardage to be put up than we might think. But this is going to be a volatile matchup. And I think that this is going to be one that if you are starting players on either side of the ball, you do not want to watch this game. This is going to be ugly. You're not going to feel good. You're not going to feel tingly. You're not going to be excited. But this is one of those things where you might check the score after the game is in completion and see how your points look then. Because I don't think you're going to want to watch this thing play out.
Yeah, it feels like we probably won't see a ton of it on Red Zone. But yeah, definitely check out the score at the end, because there's at least maybe some potential that with these defenses being so poor, that we could get some fantasy production from the players that we were hoping to trust coming into the year. And like you said, if Justin Fields, I mean, if he can't do it this week against the Broncos defense, they lead the NFL in missed tackles. They're dead last in PFF coverage grade. They're 31st in run defense grade. They're obviously dead last in overall defensive grade, the Broncos. So if Fields cannot do it this week, it just feels like there's no hope there, because this is really, I mean, the ideal matchup for him to get right. And then on the Broncos side, I know Jerry Jeudy off to a slow start. I think he's currently wide receiver 71. This is a great matchup for him. Broncos ranked 28th in coverage grade. Their D line cannot get pressure. They're 29th in pass rush grade, 24th in pressure rate. Jerry Jeudy's target rate on non-pressure dropbacks so far this year is 31.3%, which leads the team. So on pressure dropbacks, that falls to just 5.6%, which is the sixth lowest on the team. So big difference there. As long as Russell Wilson can stay clean and get the ball to Jerry Jeudy, I think this could be his first big game of the season.
Okay, what about another Denver Broncos wide receiver who I think needs a little bit more work, but still
Yeah.
produces, apparently, despite the lack of work here? Marvin Mims Jr., rookie wide receiver who the team traded up to get, is not running routes very often, is not being targeted very often, but somehow has 7 receptions, 195 receiving yards, and a score. And that's not even including the work he's done on special teams. Scoring there, eighth best PFF receiving grade so far through 3 weeks. Again, that's on just 27 routes run. Like, very, very, very efficient, averaging 7.22 yards per route run, which is absolutely insane. Leads the league by a pretty significant margin. Second behind him is Tyreek Hill at 4.74 yards per route run. Marvin Mims has just been like the peak pinnacle of efficiency, nearly a perfect passer rating when targeted. Even has a couple of contested catches. You love to see that. If like, is there any world, like, because obviously I think this is kind of a high upside matchup, especially for a guy as speedy as Marvin Mims. If they're following the trends, if they're seeing the efficiency, I feel like you got to work Marvin Mims into this game plan a little bit if you are the Denver Broncos, and get that ball in his hands and let him force missed tackles all the way down the field, until he reaches the end zone for a touchdown. Like, I think you could do worse than Marvin Mims, even though he's not running routes. And that's like the scariest thing in the world. But if you need a what the heck, a desperation option, Marvin Mims might have a decent week. I don't know.
Yeah, look, I love Marvin Mims. I've been on the Marvin Mims train all off season, and I've just been super frustrated with the usage. So I think you can trust him maybe in leagues that reward kick return yards and things like that a little bit more. But yeah, like you said, if you're looking for that high upside play and you think this is the week that they start to get him more involved, it's definitely a great matchup to do it. It's so like Brandon Johnson and Traquan Smith, like guys that you would not think would be playing ahead of him, considering how efficient Marvin Mims has been. I just I don't know. There always seems to be like a Sean Payton barrier to put in front of Marvin Mims to keep him from fully going off and being able to trust him. I know it's still early in the season, but yeah, I love Marvin Mims. I just don't love the usage, I guess.
I definitely don't love the usage, but hey, last week ran a season high 11 routes, which,
You do like to
yeah,
see
it
that.
might only be 11 routes more than I ran last week, but
Yeah.
technically we're trending sort of in a direction.
Yeah.
I
Almost
want,
double his routes from the week before.
yeah, Sean Payton, if you're listening, get Marvin Mims the ball.
I know. Like, if you want to win football games and your offense is performing the way they are, how do you not get this guy on the field more? It's so frustrating. This is another thing every year where there's coaching decisions that just make me like my brain break because I don't understand them. But here we are.
27.9 yards per reception. That man is a
Crazy.
freak.
Yeah, he's
Freak.
amazing. Ah, Oh, well. All right, let's do a quick ad break here from our friends at DraftKings. We're back with another week of football, and DraftKings Sportsbook is keeping us in on the NFL action with great offers every single game day. New customers can bet $5 and get $200 instantly in bonus bets. Throw 5 down on any of this week's epic matchups to walk away an instant winner. And DraftKings isn't stopping there. All customers can take advantage of 2 new offers every game day this September. Football's more fun when you're in on the action, so download the app now and sign up with code PFF. New customers can bet $5 to get $200 instantly in bonus bets only on DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL with code PFF. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.1800gambler.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly on behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort. Licensee partner, Golden Nugget, Lake Charles, Louisiana. 21 plus age varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. See sportsbook.draftkings.com/football terms for eligibility, terms and responsible gaming resources. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. Eligibility and deposit restrictions apply. All right, let's go on to an NFC East battle here of the Washington Commanders and the Philadelphia Eagles. Kate, where do you want to start in this game?
Let's talk about the Eagles, because I think last week there were some questions about the backfield in particular and how they were going to deploy that backfield. Kenneth Gainwell had missed week 2, which kind of perpetuated the ultimate DeAndre Swift breakout. Mm-hmm. But there was questions like, okay, now if Kenneth Gainwell's healthy, what is it that we see? And I think what we saw, even though the box score kind of indicates that this was a relatively even split, this was actually DeAndre Swift's show. Just in general, the split snaps were generally kind of a little bit misleading. I think Gainwell just 2 fewer carries than DeAndre Swift on the entire week. But that return, he got a lot of his touches kind of once the game was like on ice, right? Like Gainwell had 9 of his 14 carries in the fourth quarter. DeAndre Swift is just blowing him out of the water in terms of efficiency across the board. Explosive runs, first downs, missed forced tackle rate. Like, this is the DeAndre Swift show. And I don't think that there's any concern for Gainwell, even if when you look at that week 3 box score, it might seem a little bit scarier than it really is.
Yeah, that's fair. And yeah, it was a bigger lead for Philadelphia last week. So that did help Gainwell's numbers come up a bit. But yeah, when you see the efficiency of DeAndre Swift, 8.1 yards per carry on 16 attempts compared to 3.1 on 14 for Gainwell, you'd hope that DeAndre Swift continues to be that hot hand that Nick Sirianni promised, and that Gainwell doesn't continue to get worked in here, because that could be frustrating if he's obviously not averaging 8.1 yards per carry and has some tougher matchups. And the Eagles D-line could create a little bit of a tougher matchup here, but that is the main thing, I think, for Philadelphia, because everything else we pretty much have a decent sense of what they are at this point through the season in Philadelphia. But on the Washington side, a lot of question marks, I think. I mean, Jahan Dotson, super slow start for him. He's wide receiver 74 on the year, and this isn't a great matchup against the Eagles either, right? Dotson already owns one of the lower target rates on the team at 12.8% this season, but when there's pressure on the play, which this Eagles D-line can certainly do, he sees an even bigger hit. He drops to just 6.8% target rate on the season, which is 6th among the team's receiving options. So that does concern me. And then Sam Howell too. The inability to avoid sacks has been the most frustrating thing, I think, for Sam Howell. Obviously, the interceptions were bad last week, but we won't dig too much into that. But
it was only 4.
It was only
Leave
4.
him alone.
Yeah. Leads the league in pressure to sack conversion rate. Sam Howell, 39.6%. So that is not good going up against an Eagles D-line that is as good as they are and potentially haven't even really hit their stride yet this year. They're 9th in pass rush grade. And Hassan Reddick, who was their leading pass rusher last year, has kind of been a ghost through the first 3 games. So could be that game that puts the Eagles pass rush over the top if Howell's tendencies continue.
It could be, but I want to point out the secondary. So if if Sam Howell can clean up some of his contributions toward these sacks, this has been an Eagles secondary that has generally kind of struggled this season. Large part due to injury. More injuries piled up here in week 3. Starting safety for the Eagles. I don't know if he's going to be out with a neck injury. Neck injuries are always scary and never good. We've just kind of seen a rotation of injuries here through this Eagles secondary that have been conducive to passing yards, which very interesting. Also allowing the second most passing touchdowns in the league. This has been actually a productive matchup for opposing quarterbacks and wide receivers. I do think the kicker will be how well he can handle that pressure. But I still think, just given that situation, I like Terry McLaurin a bit better than Jahan Dotson this week. Cole Turner is a really interesting option though at tight end if you're really in a pinch in a dark spot. Sam Howell seems to really like Cole Turner, and I'm not sure if Logan Thomas is going to be playing in this game, but I'm assuming not. And if so, I do think like Cole Turner, man, why not? Like I try it out, see what happens.
It's
These
been
are
nice
like
to see.
do you guys like my what the heck? Like screw it. Cole Turner's down there somewhere. Chuck it up and just see what happens with some of these matchups. Like say you could do worse.
Yeah, I mean, look, sometimes you got to have some dart throws in your lineup week to week and hope that they pay off. And the target rate has been there for Cole Turner. I think they were rotating those tight ends a little bit more than you probably would have liked to see. But I don't know Logan Thomas. I don't know if he was back at practice or not. I know it was a concussion for him that he was dealing with. So he might have been back at practice, at least limited this week so far. But there's potential there for Turner because Howell has shown a tendency to go to him, which you like to see. But I don't know. I worry about the Eagles defense just continuously improving through the year. I don't think they've been off to the best start that they've been. And then Sam Howell's start to his game last week definitely scared me a little bit because he just hasn't shown an ability to kind of get away from those sacks and the turnover worthy plays. But there will be better matchups for Howell too. I'm not giving up on him completely.
Yeah, I think that this is a week where if I'm totally streaming and like I've said this a million times, I don't think this is a great matchup for a lot of offenses. I think this is just kind of one of those weird weeks where the offenses match up with kind of some equally matched defenses, and that's going to create a little bit of a power struggle. So if you are struggling at the quarterback position, I think you could do worse. First 2 weeks saw him finish inside the top 13, which you like to see. This is going to be a situation where I think they're going to be playing from behind. On that note, I think this is a bad matchup for Brian Robinson. We saw last week when the game got out of hand against the Buffalo Bills, kind of right off the bat, like we got work for Brian Robinson, and slowly throughout the game, they started getting more snaps for Antonio Gibson. He's a converted wide receiver. Like it makes sense why, if you're playing from behind and you're in obvious passing situations, why you would have Antonio Gibson in the mix there. But I do think this is going to be another matchup where we see something similar in similar usage. We saw Antonio Gibson over 60% of snaps last week. Wouldn't be surprised to see another sort of similar range for work, especially against this defense.
Yeah, that's a good call. It's a nice potential game script there for Antonio Gibson. And yeah, I am worried about Brian Robinson this week because the Eagles do own the best run defense grade in the league so far. So could be a little bit tough sledding for him, but don't mind it for Antonio Gibson. I think that's a nice call there. All right, let's move on to the Baltimore Ravens and the Cleveland Browns. And man, this Browns defense they're truly like elite at this point. They're the second highest PFF defensive grade. They've dominated, especially up front with their defensive line. They rank inside the top 5 in pass rush grade, pressure rate, quick pressure rate. They have the fastest average time to pressure as well in the league at 2.17 seconds. So a little bit concerning, I think, for the potential for this Ravens passing offense here. Zay Flowers is the one that stands out to me, as sad as it is, because I love Zay Flowers. I think he's got off to a great start this season. He's already, I think, wide receiver 29 in PPR leagues, but as much of a temptation as I have to start him this week, given the early success, I do think that this Browns defensive line specifically could cause a lot of problems for Lamar Jackson and that passing offense. And Flowers has been typically one of Lamar's go-to targets this season. He leads the team in target rate. But when he's pressured, when Lamar Jackson is pressured, Zay Flowers' target rate drops to 6.9%, which is the lowest on the team. So, or among the lowest on the team. But I think it's a tough matchup for Zay Flowers. He's the one that I'm probably I kind of have to avoid him this week because this Browns defense is really, really good.
They're scary good. So this is where the Browns defense sits through the year so far, right? League low in quarterback fantasy points per game, wide receiver fantasy points per game allowed, second fewest running back points allowed in fantasy, and league low fantasy points allowed to the tight end. So they are allowing the fewest fantasy points to 3 out of the 4 positions for your fantasy teams this season. Like, this has been a no-go matchup. I was very high on Lamar Jackson this week, so that kills me to put it on the brakes this quickly. But this has been absolutely suffocating matchup. Opposing quarterbacks averaging less than 140 yards per game against this Cleveland Browns defense. Like, not even a half a touchdown per game. Like, this has been
crazy,
suffocating. And even for, elite options like a Lamar Jackson, like a Mark Andrews, even, you've got to be really concerned because the Browns have just shut down on literally all forces. The Browns have allowed a total through 3 weeks, 26 receiving yards to opposing tight ends, 26 total, not per game, which in and of itself would be like pretty decent. No, 26 yards total. That's nuts.
Yeah, that's unreal. They've just been, so impressive. And we've been talking about them even the last couple of weeks. We've just been, avoiding anybody going up against this Browns defense. And you just laid out all the reasons why. So even with the Ravens here, I would definitely be avoiding them as well. But how about on the Browns side of things? Deshaun Watson, decent game last week, aside from that, the backwards pass that he did there, which for whatever reason, I don't know what the hell that was, but
it was the best play I've ever seen in my life. That's what it was. It had me in stitches watching that play. If you're a Browns fan, you were probably sick to your stomach watching that play. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. But one of his better games. But here's the thing, like, it still wasn't a outstanding game. Like, are we just settling for a lack of upside at this point? Like, I feel like we saw Deshaun Watson be kind of serviceable and we were like, all right, he's back, instead of saying like, okay, no, we were kind of hoping for the top 3 upside that we saw in years past. Like, no, he puts up, like a QB9 performance. We're like, oh, wow, way to go, buddy. Like, it's not, I don't know. I don't understand the upside. And the Ravens to this point, like, also haven't been, necessarily an easy defensive matchup, easier than the Browns, but still not a matchup without its challenges, only allowing 230 passing yards per game, just a touchdown per game, 25th in fantasy points allowed to opposing quarterbacks. This could be like an ugly defensive matchup, AFC North style smash mouth football. Like, I want nothing to do with most of the assets on either of these teams.
Yeah, it's hard, right? Like, Deshaun Watson, I mean, last week, I think, he had a 70 something pass rush or passing grade last week. So that was the highest mark of his entire 9 games with the Browns through 2 seasons so far, right? So he's set the bar so low at this point that, like you said, when we see any signs of life, it's easy to kind of get excited. I don't hate the matchup for him against the Ravens. I think he's, the Ravens, just the way that they're banged up right now as far as their defensive line, they're not creating pressure the way that they're used to. So there could be like one of these pockets in the schedule where it's a decent time to take advantage of the Ravens. But Yeah, I get it. I definitely get it. Deshaun Watson has, it's hard to get too excited about him after what we've seen for the larger part of his sample size with the Browns here. And I mean, he did have that really nice throw to Donovan Peoples-Jones last week. That was pretty much, yeah, the only thing that kind of saved him and his
See,
grade, because it was
anytime
just easy.
anytime you think back to like that one specific play
Yeah,
that really did it, like that's generally not a good
it
sign.
is.
And like the Tennessee secondary, not great. Like I would have expected more
Yeah.
from him, to be honest. But I don't know. Maybe I'm just expecting a little bit too much, or I'm being too hard on Deshaun Watson. Maybe my Steelers bias is coming out here, but it's just I think you said it perfectly. It feels like the bar is so low for Deshaun Watson right now that we are getting table scraps and thinking that it's you know worthy of starting in our fantasy lineups. And I don't know that that's the case in general, let
Mhm.
alone, I know the Ravens are super banged up on both sides of the ball. But I
Yeah.
I
No,
don't
it's
like table scraps. I want a full
yeah,
dinner. I want a full dinner.
I like
And
that. Yeah, that's
like Sam Howell might not give me a full dinner, but at least I know he's trying to cook something. I like he's it might be burnt, it might be inedible, but I feel like he's cooking at least and making the attempt. I just don't
he's
I don't
putting
know.
the effort in. Yeah. And he
Yeah.
doesn't cost $230 million either. So there's that.
It's amazing. Fifth round
Yeah.
draft. Okay. Like fifth round draft capital. All right. Like if you
Yeah.
throw 4 interceptions against one of the best defenses in the NFL, like you'll be fine. But
Yeah.
like Deshaun Watson, I'm not giving as much leeway to.
No.
Even though like by nature of his contract and the situation and the draft capital involved, they have to give him more leeway than
Mhm.
anybody in the league, which is crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a situation to just kind of keep monitoring, and yeah,
Ugh.
maybe he gets better, but like you said, there hasn't been a lot of signs that it is. So we'll see what happens this week against the Ravens. Let's go on to one of your teams here, the Pittsburgh Steelers at the Houston Texans. So, I mean, we'll start with the Steelers running backs again because we always kind of come back to them. But Najee Harris, we thought it would be a better week last week, and it just kind of continues to disappoint. Although another great matchup for him this week against the Texans, but yeah, the Jalen Warren snap share continues to kind of creep up there as well, which is concerning. So, your weekly update on the Steelers backfield, how's it going for you?
I hate giving this weekly update. But you know what? Like the snap share, the thing that you love to see from Najee Harris in week 3 was just the touch total, right? Like he's clearly not the third down back. That role definitely belongs to Jalen
Right.
Warren at this point. But you actually finally saw a game where he saw some significant usage as a rusher. 19 total rush attempts. You like to see that. Still seeking his first touchdown of the year, still inefficient. But what I think is most interesting is that like the split between him and Jalen Warren, at least on the ground, there's not a big difference in terms of the efficiency there. Like
Mhm.
Najee Harris is more efficient on the ground this season than Jalen Warren in virtually every category that we can quantify here. I think other than stuff rate, which Najee has a higher stuff rate, but like yards per attempt, missed forced tackle rate, like Najee Harris actually has the edge in pretty much all of these categories. And I think watching him, Najee actually looks like a decent runner. I think he looks like a better runner than we've seen from him in years past. But this is a really bad run blocking unit, 29th right now in PFF run blocking grade. Don't trust that offensive line to do much blocking of anything,
Yeah.
in the passing game, in the running game. This is just not a great situation. And I don't think that this is an offense that's creative enough to scheme with the personnel they have to set him up for some success. Like every time he has the ball in his hands, it's like he's immediately being swallowed
Yeah.
without the presence of blockers. And I feel like behind a good offensive line, Najee Harris would probably rank top 10 in the league in rushing yards right now, but he's not. And
Yeah.
that's not going to change anytime soon. So, like, Are you starting him? Probably, because if, he's got a decent matchup and he's going to see 15 to 20 carries, like, don't you have to start him?
Yeah, they're pretty much all the leagues that I have Najee Harris in. I still like just kind of trot him out there and just hope for the best, but so far it hasn't worked out. But sometimes you just have no choice, right? You have to depend on the volume and hope that these things turn around. And the volume is still there to an extent for Najee Harris. And like you said, it has been nice to see that he has been at least a little bit more efficient than Jaylen Warren as well. So there's hope, but yeah, the Steelers offense as a whole right now, I think is been a struggle. So that part of it is concerning. But yeah, anything else for the Steelers offense you want to talk about, or should we talk about Houston?
I think we should talk about Houston because
Sure.
I think this is kind of an interesting matchup.
Mm-hmm.
CJ Stroud, who is playing exceedingly well, I think for
Yeah.
well beyond anybody's expectations so far this season. Ranks fifth in the NFL in passing yards, 4 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. He's just playing like clean football. He's not, having a ton of turnovers. He does have, a few turnover worthy plays that haven't translated to some of those turnovers. Not necessarily like a gunslinger at this point. 8.3 averaged up the target. That's fine. But not necessarily making a ton of big time throws, just a 1.6% big time throw rate through 3 weeks so far this season. But again, you kind of like what you see. He's at home, and the Steelers defense, they've got some really shiny parts in terms of their pass rush, but in terms of their coverage ability, even last week, a week where they had several, like Levi Wallace, for example, 2 interceptions on the game. And you look and you think that's fantastic. He won the game. And then you look at the stat sheet and you see what Devontae Adams did to them. And you realize, like, who did they get lucky? Like,
Yeah.
this secondary is not as good as I think the interceptions might necessarily lead you to believe. Yes, they're forcing turnovers, but in terms of yardage allowed, I think there are plenty of leaky points in this defense that, a guy like Tank Dell, who is smooth and is such a good separator in terms like his route running ability, he's just so smooth. And, for a guy who's seen, increasing workloads, increasing target share week by week, I think this is a really nice matchup for a guy that can create separation in the way that Tank Dell can.
I'm with you 100%. I love Tank Dell this week. Look, the Steelers, they do deploy a fair bit of man coverage above average, but they rank 25th in coverage grade while in man this season. Texans wide receivers haven't faced like a lot of man coverage, but Tank Dell has been the one that stood out the most for me. Looking at those numbers, 1.35 fantasy points per run against man, which ranks second among all qualifying wide receivers. So I love some Tank Dell this week. I even like Nico Collins this week. I think there's a opportunity there for him. I know he had a down week last week. I think he could be one of those potential bounce back candidates. I just love the Texans offense. I think it's a fun offense just because they're passing the ball so much. And look, that could create some opportunity for that Steelers pass rush. We know they have like 2 of the most opportune pass rushers there in TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith, going against a pass heavy offense with a rookie quarterback. But there still should be plenty of volume and an opportunity there for guys like Tank Dell and Nico Collins, I think, this week against that Steelers secondary, like you said. So I'm excited about them. I would be putting them out there, and I'd probably even be starting CJ Stroud in a potential streaming spot as well.
Yes, I'm actually on board with you there. Outlined CJ Stroud in my in case of emergency waiver wire pickups for week 4. So totally in agreement there. Available in 73% of ESPN leagues right now. He's available. And, even if he makes some mistakes, which like he might have, an interception, he might have a fumble. You don't know how that's going to necessarily shake out when he faces the kind of pressure that he's going to get. But
Right.
why not?
Yeah.
Again, what the heck?
Another why not? Why not? Yeah. But no, you're right. It's one of those ones. You're taking a risk there against the Steelers pass rush because we know that they could create turnovers and get after the quarterback a lot. But at the same time, the secondary is susceptible to giving up plays and to fantasy wide receivers, and there's definitely the volume there. So I don't mind it. I'm taking the risk with CJ Stroud and the Texans wide receivers this week.
Cautious, but excited.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's go on to the Las Vegas Raiders at the Los Angeles Chargers. It's possible that we get Austin Eckler back this week. It's not for sure. It feels like he's trending in the right direction. If not, it would be Josh Kelly again. Josh Kelly's been pretty disappointing so far. Haven't been too excited to plug him into my lineups. I would be much more excited to plug Austin Eckler into my lineup for sure. We also get Josh Palmer, who emerged last week as the number 2 wide receiver there next to Keenan Allen, and saw some decent usage, good production. He was a hot waiver ad this week. I would be interested in him this week as well for the Chargers going against the Las Vegas defense, because I think they are also susceptible to some fantasy production. How are you feeling about the Chargers offense this week?
Kind of intrigued. I think there's a lot of upside to like maybe against this Raiders defense in particular. I could actually picture this being kind of a higher scoring matchup just because I don't trust either of these defenses, which generally speaking, when you have a high scoring matchup, you're going to have some of those fantasy points scored. Now, obviously there are questions, on both sides of the ball in terms of injuries. So that is something to monitor. But like if Jimmy Garoppolo is playing, like it's obviously lights up for Devontae Adams, but also that gets, I think, a lot of consideration here for, Jacoby Myers, especially as a flex option. This is, this Chargers secondary has been one of the most susceptible in the league in terms of yardage given up to the fantasy wide receivers, quarterbacks. Like this has been kind of a juicy matchup. So again, keep an eye on the injury report in terms of Jimmy Garoppolo, who's dealing with a concussion. But if Jimmy Garoppolo plays, like he's even a viable flex play. Chargers are leading the league in fantasy points, allowing to opposing quarterbacks, allowing almost 360 passing yards per game, which is ridiculous. Like, I think this is fine. Even Ryan Tannehill, of all players, 21 fantasy points against this defense. Like, you start your quarterbacks, you start your wide receivers against the Los Angeles Chargers henceforth.
Yeah, I think you have to. And yeah, I'm with you with Jacoby Myers as well. I loved him when I wrote up the wide receiver man coverage report again this week. He stood out as another potential strong play. Chargers have been well above average in zone coverage rate this season, but they ranked 27th in coverage grade while in zone. And then you look at Jacoby Myers specifically, he's averaged 0.65 fantasy points per route run against zone coverage, which ranks 5th among wide receivers. So love it for him. I think I love the way that he's been involved in that offense too in the games that he's played. So I would definitely be firing up Jacoby Myers against this Chargers defense. The other player that is interesting is Josh Jacobs, because Josh Jacobs, he's gotten progressively better as the weeks have gone on, but not like the rushing leader Josh Jacobs that we saw last year, right? So this feels like a pretty good Josh Jacobs week if it's going to come, right? Against the Los Angeles Chargers defense, who have been allowing some fantasy points here to running backs.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a fair position. Like I don't think you're not starting Josh Jacobs under really any circumstances. So just one of those situations where maybe, like you're going to feel a little bit more confident than you do in most weeks that you have so far based on his performance.
Yeah, for sure. So just feeling a little bit better about Josh Jacobs this week. Hopefully gets back into that top running back, maybe potentially a top 10 performance this week against the Chargers. There's hope at least that we could see it. So let's keep it moving here. We'll go on to the New England Patriots and the Dallas Cowboys. Not like the super interesting matchup really, but any interest in, let's start with New England, in any of their fantasy starters against the Cowboys defense?
No.
No.
Like this is not a matchup. Like I know it was kind of a free for all last week in terms of the production, that the Arizona Cardinals posted on the Cowboys. It was just absolutely out of left field. I was so shocked. Didn't even recognize that defense, but
Mhm.
I'm not expecting another big surprising game like that. I know obviously there's the absence of Trayvon Diggs and what that will mean for the secondary. Like there are reasonable questions there, but I think last week was an anomaly. I think this is still a very, very good and talented defense. I'm not looking to target this as a matchup, but especially not given that this isn't necessarily a offense that has a propensity for scoring fantasy points anyway.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I'm with you. I don't feel great about it. I think Hunter Henry's probably the one that I'm starting again. I know he had a down week as well last week. Ramondre Stevenson, you're probably playing, but everything else, I'm with you. I think it was maybe like a glitch in the matrix for the Dallas defense last week against the Cardinals because nobody saw that coming. I don't know that the Cardinals are going to repeat that or that they saw it coming either. Cardinals also have a tough matchup, but we'll get into in a second. But yeah, I just don't think we'll see it again from this Dallas defense. I think they'll get back to being very, very good. And then the Patriots too, very solid defense. So maybe this is one of those low scoring games too that we've kind of talked about here, where they're just tougher matchups on both sides. And look, we know what the Dallas offense is, so we know who we're starting there. And but it still doesn't feel like I feel like I'm tempering expectations for fantasy potential in this game.
Yeah, I don't think you're like again, like I've said all day, this isn't a matchup that you're necessarily like targeting. Like in a week as ugly as this, like you're gonna want to target the highest scoring games of the week, and this
Right.
doesn't project as one of those matchups. Like you're just looking for some scoring upside, to fill in some of these roster spots, some of these flex spots as the week goes on. You're gonna look at, some of those options like again, higher scoring matchups, Dolphins, Bills, probably a lot of players rostered there, but even Rams, Colts, two defenses I don't necessarily trust. Raiders, Chargers, like those are the places you're gonna
Yeah.
find, I think, more of these flex options than you are seeking them out just because in a game like Patriots, Cowboys.
Yeah. With you for sure. Let's keep it going to the Arizona Cardinals, who are at the San Francisco 49ers. Arizona, obviously, they pulled off the win last week against Dallas. We just touched on it, but I don't know. It's going to be tough sledding for them here against the 49ers. I think we could potentially get another big Debo week. Even with Brandon Ayuk back, Debo was awesome on Thursday night. Love his usage. This Cardinals defense, I don't have the faith in them that they'll be able to stop this San Francisco offense by any means. So how are you feeling? Are you firing up all your 49ers this week? Anybody that you're not starting for San Francisco?
I think you're starting all the usual suspects, although like
Yeah.
I think the Cardinals defense, for what it's worth, not as bad, I think, as
Mm-hmm.
we had originally projected. Again, I'm projecting, this team regresses a bit closer to the mean, but I
Yeah.
think even coming out of the gate before that win over the Cowboys, this was a defense that I was watching and kind of just generally surprised that they didn't look as bad as I thought they did on paper. So I don't think this is a defense against a league worst or an offense going against a league worst defense.
Right.
But I think it's a fine matchup. You're going to start all of your typical players. On the other side of the ball, I think the Cardinals are kind of in an interesting spot coming off
Mm-hmm.
a very productive outing, especially for James Conner, who's probably
Right.
been to this point like the most underrated fantasy asset for where he's
Yeah.
been drafted. Just been an absolute workhorse. Does not seem to be skipping a beat in terms of offensive production, even without Kyler Murray in the mix. Like 14 carries, 98 rushing yards, and a touchdown against the Dallas Cowboys. Like you're going to take that all day. At 14 carries, 62 yards, no touchdowns, but it got several receptions up against that Commanders defense. Also not an easy matchup. Like he's withstood some difficult and challenging matchups. And I think this is another matchup, but you can go back to the well with James Conner. And I don't hate it.
I'm with you. Yeah, I'm definitely leaving James Conner in my lineups, treating him as an RB2 pretty much every week, regardless of matchup, because he's shown no reason really for us not to trust him. Like you said, he's got the workhorse usage. He's been effective. He's putting up the fantasy points that we're hoping for and doing it against these matchups. I know the 49ers are another tough one, but the volume is there for him. He's played really well this season. So that is the main guy for Arizona for me, that I'm interested. I'm not as interested in the Arizona wide receivers, although Michael Wilson's somewhat interesting to me if he can get a larger workload, but hasn't quite got there yet. Hollywood Brown, I don't know. I don't feel like I can trust Hollywood Brown in lineups just yet. I want to see more from Josh Dobbs, I think, at first.
Yeah, I want to see, maybe 2 weeks of solid offensive production from this team before I'm like, fire up your Cardinals.
Yeah.
I just don't. I don't think you can trust Marquise Brown necessarily. He's kind of been already a volatile wide receiver to
Yeah.
begin with. Touched on each of the last 2 games. You like to see that. He's had a decent target share. But I think this is just generally speaking an offense that I don't have a lot of trust in outside of the run game.
Yep. It is not a great offense for Arizona. Despite coming off the win, I don't know that they'll be able to do it against the 49ers. So I am just going to be cautious with them and just stick with James Conner as well. All right, let's go. Sunday Night Football, Kansas City Chiefs at the New York Jets. Kate, there is a big storyline in this one. I don't think anybody's really talked about it enough. I don't think that we have to, but no, it's yeah, obviously the Taylor Swift stuff has just dominated the headlines. I was trying so hard not to say Taylor Swift in this episode, but
You would think that like we were about to like start Taylor Swift in your fantasy lineups, which I would do
right.
if I could, but I can't. She doesn't have like tight end eligibility, but if so, I would start her over Travis Kelce. No question.
Wow.
Yeah, obviously, like that's the only storyline that matters for this game. But I guess if we have to talk about like a secondary storyline, we could talk about the Chiefs wide receivers, which
Yeah.
continues to be a maddening rotation, but I think we're starting to see a little bit more of a role carved out for Rashee Rice, which has me
Mm-hmm.
very, very excited.
That's been nice to see. Yeah, Rashee Rice kind of slowly but surely emerging there amongst the group. And I hope it continues. I know that the Chiefs, they love their rotation there. I know they've got a couple injuries that's kind of cut down the amount of players that are rotating in and out. So that has helped him for sure. Not so much that I'm willing to start him necessarily, but like potentially again maybe one of those dart throw guys that you might want to trust this week. I don't know. Would anybody on the Chiefs offense or among their wide receivers be one of those dart throw plays for you this week against the Jets?
I'd still consider Rashee Rice. I'm obsessed.
Right.
He has a decent frame on him. He's got some size, 6'1", 204. Ran a season high 21 routes last week, was targeted on 7 of those, caught 5 receptions, 59 receiving yards, didn't get the touchdown, but if I'm remembering correctly, got tackled like right in front of a goal line, which like almost could have been a touchdown unless I'm totally hallucinating, which maybe I am. It's late in the week. I'm low on sleep here. But Rashee Rice, I think, again, just continues to look like the best wide receiver on the field. 2.77 yards per route run. You love to see that. You just need him to run more routes. He's being targeted on a high percentage of those routes. Again, just need him to run more routes. And so far, I think, the fact that he's commanding a decent target share, that 7 targets beats either of his weeks prior. The fact that he's being targeted when he's on the field, I think should signal to the staff that like this is a guy that Patrick Mahomes wants to throw to. So like let's get him out there and running. And I do think like obviously this is a really tough matchup against the Jets. They have a great secondary, it kind of just all around. But the fact that there's no like one guy, this can kind of be a mixed bag of Patrick Mahomes reading coverage and seeing who's where on the field and who's open. And I think that could be Rashee Rice. Again, Rashee Rice, wide receiver 1 for the Kansas City Chiefs here on out.
Let's go. Let's hope so. I mean, yeah, we want to see him emerge. I love the fit for Rashee Rice in this Chiefs offense, and it seems like Mahomes likes it as well. So why not give him more opportunity to get on the field and show what he's capable of? On the Jets side, I mean, it's hard to talk about this offense in a positive light here, but Brees Hall at least did see a bit of a takeover last week, which I thought was great to see. You know, not like the best showing for him as far as efficiency goes. But it was good at least to see him kind of get the majority of the snaps, get the majority of the carries over Dalvin Cook, who has been even less efficient. He's just really struggled this year. So Brees Hall, I think for me, like if I have to pick like a shining light of hope in this Jets offense, it's still him. Although the efficiency last week obviously was not what we're expecting from him. We saw what he could do in week 1. We'd hope to see a little bit more of that here in week 4. So as long as the usage continues in favor of Brees Hall, I do feel fairly fine plugging him into a lineup if I have to.
If you have to, but I don't necessarily love this matchup up
Mm.
against the Chiefs. I think again, generally like a quieter defense that I'm thinking has probably exceeded a little bit of expectation so far this season. And I still think they have plenty of room to grow in terms of their production as a defense, but I don't know that this will be a matchup to target necessarily. And generally speaking, like outside of a couple of those breakaway runs, which again, you very much hope for,
Mhm.
and you hope for some of those missed forced tackles. But outside of that, like there's not been a catastrophic difference in terms of the efficiency for Brees Hall, versus Dalvin Cook. And as the saying goes, like Dalvin Cook looks cooked, and like in between those breakaway plays, I don't think Brees Hall's looked all that great either. And I think this is just an offense that is struggling. And I think that's just going to continue to trickle over into the running back position. You don't sit Brees Hall, but I feel like I'm just going to, again, continue to temper expectations until we see either a bigger sort of split between Dalvin Cook and Brees Hall, or, we see some really favorable matchups. But until then, I'm looking to supplement my lineups with a little bit of upside elsewhere.
That's fair. Yeah, it's oh man, what a sad outlook for this Jets offense. It really is. Like it's just so hard to find anything positive to get excited about fantasy wise, just knowing how much they've struggled already this year without Aaron Rodgers. So I don't think we have to spend much more time on them. Let's move on to the Seattle Seahawks at the New York Giants. It is only one Monday Night Football game this week, so that's been nice. We don't have to worry about watching two at the same time here. Seahawks Giants. The Seahawks coverage unit been kind of mess so far this year, so I don't know about Giants wide receivers or anything like that, but I do know that Saquon Barkley was working on individual drills today, but still not yet cleared for week 4. And with it being a Monday Night Football game, it definitely makes it tougher for fantasy managers. So if Barkley can't go, any interest in Matt Breida this week?
No, no, it just like I, so they're at home, right? Like this
Yeah.
should be a decent matchup. Like the Seahawks haven't lit the world on fire by any means. Like it should be fine. But if they do get behind, like I think we kind of saw Matt Breida get totally written out of this rushing game script. Was running some routes, but not necessarily over involved as a receiver either. Like I don't trust the rotation at running back enough. I don't trust that Breida's the guy enough just yet. And again, but if you're planning on starting Saquon Barkley, yes, you must roster Matt
Right.
Breida because you cannot go into Monday Night Football with that kind of liability on your hands.
Yeah,
Risky,
you need
risky
a
little game.
pivot there. Yeah, you got to have a pivot ready because it doesn't seem like it's a lock at all for Saquon Barkley to play on Monday night. So that is concerning. Yeah, if you got to plug Breida in, I mean, I know it was against the 49ers last week, so that made it tougher for him. Seattle's not as good of a defense, like you said, but yeah, I just don't have as much confidence in Matt Breida as I would, obviously, if Saquon Barkley is in there. But if you have no choice, you put him in there. Otherwise, maybe you could find like Zach Charbonnet or somebody off waivers, if you can't pivot away from Saquon to Breida, for example. But on the Seattle side, I mean, I think it's really not much. Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, I think should be great starts here against a poor Giants coverage unit. They rank 30th in coverage grade while in man defense. They're a top 5 team in man coverage deployment this year. So I just think, yeah, it's not really saying anything. There's not much of a hot take or anything. You start Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf against the Giants, right?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, that's a given. Lock it, and load it.
Oh.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the gist there. Any interest in Charbonnet as a, like, I know you mentioned him as like an in case of emergency
Right.
pivot. I do think the gap is starting to close a little bit more for
Mhm.
Zach Charbonnet. Saw a bump in snap share for the third straight week in week 3. 82.3 PFF rushing grade, 5th best among running backs on the week. Like, saw a few red zone carries. You love
Yeah,
those valuable touches, and he's starting to see them. And, like, I think we're going to continue to see his usage and his role maybe increase. Obviously, that translated to fantasy points for Kenneth Walker last week, not necessarily for Zach Charbonnet, but could be, a speculative ad if you have some extra
yeah,
space on your roster and can, afford to roster Charbonnet. I do think, the split and the trends that we're seeing do indicate that there could be a bigger role for Charbonnet moving forward, which is encouraging.
for sure. Yeah, I'm into it. I like Charbonnet, and again, in deeper leagues, there are opportunities to even start Charbonnet, just because, like you said, that usage has been encouraging. It's kind of getting up there, closer to a potential split there, with Kenneth Walker. But yeah, I'm definitely interested in Zach Charbonnet. I've liked him this offseason, and think he has potential to emerge there at some point. But yeah, most leagues you're probably not starting him, but I think there's room for him in deeper leagues, or as, like I said, a pivot here on Monday night if you can't start Saquon Barkley or something like that. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah.
We'll
Anything else
stash
from
these.
you do? You stash these guys and you hope for the best. And again, it's one of these high upside rookies too, right? So potentially, by midpoint of the season, we do see him take over at least like a significant role in the offense. Maybe it's just on passing downs or something like that, or 100% of the passing down work, or get some carries in there as well. So there's enough to like about Charbonnet's potential to be rostering him right now for sure.
Cool. I'm so happy when we both see the same potential and the same player, because I mean, Zach Charbonnet, like, just such a fun football player to watch. Like, obviously Kenneth Walker is too, but if they can really get this you know running back tandem as a glorified 1-2 punch, like, and really spark them and fuel that rotation, I think we could see a really productive backfield. And that's only going to help the passing and receiving game as well, as you create more room further down the field. So still a lot of untapped potential here for the Seahawks, and kind of excited to see where it shakes out.
Definitely. Yeah. Then it's an objectively fun name to say as well, Zach Charbonnet.
Yeah, love it.
Uh, yeah, it's great. But there we go. That is another big preview episode, to give everyone hopefully some more information to get those lineups set for week 4. I thank you all for listening. Kate, a big thank you to you as well for taking the time to do this with me again today. I really do appreciate it. Please let the people know what you have up on pff.com this week.
Yeah, absolutely. As usual, week 3 panic or antic. Who are you worried about? Who are you not? Whose performances are maybe just a mirage? From the previous week, comes out every Monday. Running back rushes and touches report, and then Fridays, emergency waiver wire pickups. So be sure to check those out on Friday.
Nice. Good stuff there. As for me, I have the IDP fantasy report. It's up on the website today. It's got all the usage for every defensive player. IDP waiver wires all are included in there as well. IDP rankings. We got the wide receiver man zone coverage performance report as well. It's free up on the site, going through every single team's wide receivers and how they performed against man and zone, and then potential matchup nuggets as well. O-line, D-line matchups to target and avoid will be out on Friday as well for me. So check all those out on pff.com. Please subscribe to the PFF Fantasy YouTube channel as well. We greatly appreciate that. And thank you all again. Enjoy week 4. Don't forget that there's a London game. Set those lineups Sunday morning. And until next time, peace out.